Cus D'Amato raised his hand. That's all it took. The sound of leather hitting flesh stopped. The shuffling of feet on canvas went quiet. Everyone in the gym turned toward the ring. Cus wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He just stood there with his hand up, and the silence that followed wasn't about respect or discipline. It was something else. It was the kind of silence that comes when someone sees something they didn't expect to see. Something they're not sure how to fix. This was 1982, late summer. Catskill, New York. A small gym above a police station where the paint was peeling and the heavy bags were patched with duct tape. The air smelled like sweat and old leather and the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back. Sunlight came in at an angle through the dusty glass, cutting across the ring in pale yellow bars. Cus had been training fighters for decades. He had worked with champions. He had seen natural talent before. But Mike Tyson was something different. Everyone in the gym knew it. They just didn't know what it meant yet. Tyson was 15 years old. He had been living with Cus for over a year. He wasn't the angry kid from Brownsville anymore. The one who had been arrested more times than he could count. The one who fought in the streets because it was the only language he understood. Cus had pulled him out of that world. Given him structure. Given him purpose. But what Cus was starting to realize, standing there with his hand raised and the gym gone quiet, was that he hadn't given him control. Not yet. The sparring session had started normally. Tyson was working with an older fighter named Jimmy. Jimmy was 23. A local heavyweight with decent hands and enough experience to know how to move. He wasn't there to win. He was there to give Tyson rounds. To let the kid work on his combinations and his head movement and his timing. That's how it was supposed to go. But 5 minutes into the session, something shifted. Tyson had been pressing forward the way Cus taught him. Closing distance. Slipping punches. Getting inside. Jimmy was doing his job. He was throwing jabs to keep Tyson at range, moving his feet, making the kid work for position. But then Tyson landed a left hook to the body. It wasn't a clean shot. Jimmy's elbow was down and it caught more arm than ribs. But the sound it made was wrong. A dull thud that carried across the gym. Jimmy's face changed. His breathing hitched. He took a step back and reset, but his guard was lower now. His legs were heavier. Tyson came forward again. This time he was faster. He threw a jab that snapped Jimmy's head back, then another hook to the body that landed flush. Jimmy tried to clinch. He reached out and grabbed Tyson's shoulders, pulling him in close the way you do when you need a second to recover. But Tyson didn't stop. He couldn't stop. His hands kept working. Short punches to the ribs. Uppercuts that grazed Jimmy's chin. His breathing was loud now. Sharp exhales with every punch. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused. He was somewhere else. Jimmy shoved him back. Hey, easy. His voice was strained. He wasn't angry. He was trying to communicate. Trying to remind Tyson this was just sparring. But Tyson came forward again immediately. No pause, no acknowledgement. He threw a right hand that missed Jimmy's head by inches and hit his shoulder hard enough to make Jimmy stumble sideways. That's when the other fighters stopped what they were doing. The gym started to go quiet even before Cus raised his hand. Cus had been watching from the corner. He always watched. He saw everything. The technique was there. The discipline was there. But something else was there too. Something that didn't belong in a training session. It wasn't rage. Tyson wasn't trying to hurt Jimmy. He wasn't angry at him. But he couldn't stop himself. The punches kept coming because stopping wasn't part of the equation anymore. He had crossed a line inside his own head where the opponent wasn't a sparring partner. Just a target. Just something in front of him that needed to be removed. Cus stepped to the edge of the ring and raised his hand. Stop. One word, quiet, firm. Tyson threw one more punch before the word registered. Then he stopped. His hands stayed up. His chest was heaving. Jimmy backed into the ropes, breathing hard. The other fighters in the gym stood still. Nobody said anything. The silence stretched out. Cus climbed through the ropes. He walked to the center of the ring and stood between Tyson and Jimmy. He looked at Jimmy first. "You all right?" Jimmy nodded. He touched his ribs gingerly. "Yeah, I'm good." Cus turned to Tyson. The kid's eyes were still unfocused. Still somewhere else. Sweat was dripping off his chin. His shoulders were still tensed. Cus reached up and tapped Tyson's gloves down, gently. Not a correction. Just a signal. "Come back," Tyson blinked. His eyes focused on Cus. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He took a step back. Cus didn't say anything right away. He just looked at him. There was no anger in his face. No disappointment. But there was something else. A recognition. This boy had been given a gift. A rare combination of speed and power and instinct that most fighters never touch. But gifts without discipline are curses. And what Cus had just seen wasn't a sparring session gone too far. It was a warning. He put his hand on Tyson's shoulder. "That's enough for today." Tyson nodded. He turned and walked to the corner where his water bottle was. He pulled off his gloves and sat down. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from exhaustion. From whatever had just happened inside him that he didn't fully understand. Later that evening, after the gym had emptied, Cus sat alone with a cup of tea that had gone cold. He wasn't thinking about technique. He wasn't thinking about strategy or combinations. He was thinking about something simpler and more urgent. Power without control destroys everything it touches. Cus had seen it before. Fighters with immense talent who never learned how to turn it off. Who confused aggression with discipline. They burned out. They hurt people. They hurt themselves. Tyson had the power. That was obvious. He had the instinct. The hunger. But he didn't have the one thing that made the difference between a fighter and a weapon. He didn't have the ability to choose when to stop. Cus knew what had to happen next. It wasn't about teaching Tyson how to hit harder. It was about teaching him how to be still. How to recognize the moment when the fight was over. How to carry that kind of power without letting it carry him. It was the hardest thing to teach. Harder than footwork. Harder than combinations. Because it required the fighter to confront something inside himself that most people never want to look at. The part that enjoys the violence. The part that feels alive in the chaos. The part that doesn't want to stop. If Cus couldn't teach Tyson that, then all the training in the world wouldn't matter. The boy would destroy himself long before anyone else got the chance. The next morning, Tyson was back in the gym. Cus didn't mention what had happened the day before. He just changed the way they trained. Instead of sparring, they worked on defense. Slipping punches. Moving without countering. Taking punishment without responding. It frustrated Tyson at first. He wanted to hit back. But Cus kept him there. In that uncomfortable space where the instinct to destroy had to be overridden by the discipline to wait. Fighting, Cus told him one afternoon while they were watching film, is about knowing when to pull the trigger. Not how hard, when. Tyson didn't respond. He just watched the screen. But something in the way he sat suggested he was listening. Over the next few weeks, Cus kept him in that space. Defense, movement, patience. They drilled it until it became automatic. Until the instinct to counter was replaced by the choice to counter. Other fighters noticed the change. Jimmy came back after a week. He didn't say anything about what had happened. This time it was different. This time Tyson could stop. Over the next few years, Tyson became the most dangerous fighter in the world. He won titles. He knocked out champions. He became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. People talked about his power, his speed. But the people who knew him in that gym in Catskill, the ones who had been there that day when Cus raised his hand, they knew something else. They knew that the most important fight Mike Tyson ever had wasn't in a ring in front of thousands of people. It was in that gym when he was 15 years old, when he learned, or tried to learn, that the hardest opponent isn't the man standing in front of you. It's the part of yourself that doesn't know how to stop. Cus D'Amato died in 1985, pneumonia. He was 77 years old. Tyson was still rising then, still undefeated. Cus never saw him become champion, but he'd given Tyson everything he could. The technique, the strategy, and most importantly, the understanding that fighting wasn't about destruction. It was about control. Years later, long after Cus had passed away and Tyson's career had spiraled in ways no one could have predicted, people would ask what went wrong. They would point to the fame, the money, the people around him, and all of that mattered. But some of the old trainers who had been in that gym would say something different. They would say that Tyson had been taught how to destroy, and for a while, he'd learned how to stop. But control is fragile. It requires constant reinforcement, constant attention. And when the person teaching you how to be still is gone, it's easy to forget why it mattered. The question isn't whether Mike Tyson had the power to be great. He did. The question is whether greatness is only about what you can do, or whether it's also about what you choose not to do. That day in the gym, Cus raised his hand and created a moment of silence. A pause, a chance to recognize that the fight isn't just against the opponent. It's against yourself. Against the part of you that wants to keep going past the point of reason. Against the instinct that tells you more is always better. Some people learn that lesson. Some people carry it with them for life. Others need someone to keep reminding them. And when that someone is gone, the lesson fades. Not all at once. Just slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've forgotten what you once knew. The silence in the gym that day wasn't about power. It was about awareness. The recognition that talent alone is dangerous. That without discipline, without the ability to control what you're capable of, you don't become great. You become a warning. Cus D'Amato understood that. He spent the rest of his life trying to teach it. And for a while, it worked. Tyson learned control. He learned patience. He learned how to be still before the storm. But control requires maintenance. It requires someone to hold you accountable. Someone who can raise their hand and make you stop when you can't stop yourself. Decades after that day in Catskill, Tyson would talk about Cus in interviews. His voice would soften. His eyes would change. He would describe him not just as a trainer, but as a father. The man who saved him. And when asked about his biggest regret, he wouldn't talk about the losses or the scandals. He would talk about losing Cus, about trying to navigate a world that wanted him to be a monster when the only person who taught him how to be human was gone. Maybe you know what that feels like. Not the boxing part, not the fame or the power, but the loss of the person who kept you grounded. The voice that could cut through the noise in your head with a single word. The hand on your shoulder that reminded you who you were supposed to be. We all have our own version of that gym. Our own moment when we couldn't stop ourselves. Our own struggle between what we can do and what we should do. For some of us, it's anger we can't control. Words that come out before we think. Decisions we make in the heat of the moment that we regret when things cool down. For others, it's ambition that crosses into obsession. Work that becomes an excuse to avoid everything else. Success that comes at the cost of the people who got us there. We all have something inside us that doesn't know when to stop. Something that needs an external voice to say, "That's enough for today." And the hardest part is this: that voice doesn't last forever. Parents age. Mentors move on. The people who understood us at our worst eventually leave. And when they do, we're left with a choice. Do we remember what they taught us? Do we become our own voice of reason? Or do we slowly forget why stopping mattered in the first place? Tyson's story isn't just about boxing. It's about what happens when the structure falls away. When the person who made you better is no longer there to hold you accountable. When you're surrounded by people who profit from your worst instincts instead of your best ones. How many of us have found ourselves in rooms full of people who encouraged the wrong things? Who laughed at our anger instead of questioning it? Who celebrated our excess instead of asking if we were okay? The truth is, we all need someone to raise their hand sometimes. Someone who loves us enough to interrupt. To step between us and our own momentum. To create a silence that forces us to think instead of just react. And when we lose that person, we don't just lose their wisdom. We lose the mirror they held up that showed us who we were becoming. In the end, the story of Mike Tyson is the story of all of us trying to carry power we're not always equipped to control. Trying to maintain discipline in a world that rewards impulse. Trying to remember lessons that fade without reinforcement. Trying to be the person someone believed we could be, even after they're gone. That 15-year-old in the ring, unable to stop throwing punches, wasn't a monster. He was a kid who hadn't learned yet that strength without control is just destruction wearing a different name. And maybe that's all any of us are at various points in our lives. People with power we don't fully understand. Struggling to find the discipline to use it wisely. Hoping someone will raise their hand before we go too far. The question Tyson's life asks us isn't whether we have the power to be great. Most of us do, in our own way. The question is whether we can learn to stop. Whether we can recognize the moment when enough is enough. Whether we can be still when everything inside us wants to keep moving. And whether we can hold on to that lesson when the person who taught it to us is no longer there to remind us why it matters.